All right, hey guys, so today we are doing your notes and practice on 3 new topics. Central angles, which you probably can kind of have an idea of what those would be, arc measures, and arc length. The big thing today is that you understand that these two things are completely different. Arc measures have to do with degrees around the circle. The arc length is literally the length around the circumference, and we're going to discuss that now. All right, so there's a bunch of notes within here. So your central angle is an angle that's at the center of the circle. So it says, your first bullet says a central angle is an angle with its vertex at the center, and then of the circle, and its two sides are radii. So radii is plural for radius. So this is a radius, this is a radius. It's both sides of the angle. So your central angle here is 84 degrees. And remember, all the way across is 180 degrees. So that would make sense. Fully around would be 2 180s, so 360. It says the sum of all central angles is 360 because we know it's a full circle. So it says the degree of an arc formed by the end points of the central angle is equal to the degree of the central angle. So what we're saying is from A to C, this arc measure is 84 degrees. This is arc measure. Okay, the measure of it. So we're talking about it's measured in degrees. So it says arc AC, and the way that you label an arc is the 2 letters that it starts at and ends at. So A to C with an arc over it. Now, this is minor arc, and it kind of explains this down here. So a minor arc is a small arc. Okay, so that's going to be a small portion of the circle. So it's going to be less than 180 degrees. This right here says the measure of arc A to D to C. So we're going to go around the other way. So we got to go from A all the way around to D to C. So it's going to be this part of the arc. That is a major arc because it goes around the majority of the circle, and it is greater than 180 degrees. So the way that we get 276 is we know the entire thing is 360. If we take away the 84, we're left with 276 degrees all the way around this way, which would make sense because it's the majority of the circle, so it should be close to 360. These 2 numbers right here should add up to 360, which they do because it's the 2 arcs that make up the circle right now. So it says arc length is different than arc measure. Arc length is the actual length of the arc if we were to measure this, if we were to straighten it out and measured it in centimeters, inches, and so on, and that's going to be on the back. So right now we're just focusing on arc measure, which is the exact same as the central angle, because the central angle is 276 degrees. The arc measure, that's what that little M stands for. The arc measure is 276 degrees. Okay, so it says find each angle and arc measure. I am going to do the odds with you. You are going to go back and do the evens on your own. I'm actually not going to have a forms for you to fill in for this assignment this week. There's just a lot of answer choices, so that's going to be kind of tough to plug everything in. So what we're going to do instead is you're going to do these first few with me, and then you're going to check back at the end of the video, and I'm going to have the key up so you can check your work. So right now, if you think that you can go ahead and do this, go ahead, pause the video. You can do it all on your own and then come back and check with me. If you want to do number 1, pause it and come back, you can. But go ahead and try some on your own first. All right, so hopefully you paused this, did some on your own. We're going to go over 1, 3, and 5 right now. All right, so we know that this arc measure is 34 degrees. And if we know this arc measure is 34 degrees, we know this central angle is also 34 degrees. Okay, we know that this central angle is 90 degrees. We know that this, let me get a color. We know that this is a diameter going all the way across the circle. It also is a straight line, which we know adds up to 180 degrees. So if this is 90, that means this side over here, this central angle also has to be 90. We know, let me get another color. Okay, so we know that these two lines right here make a perfect X. So if this is 90, we know opposite of it. If this is 90, we know opposite of it creates vertical angles. We haven't done that in a while. So we know this is 90 as well. Okay, you can do the same thing here. If you know this is 90, across from it, these two angles together would create 90 degrees. And then to find this missing angle, you would do 90 minus 34, which gives you 56 degrees. So there's many different ways that you can look at this. That was how I would do it. But if you got these values by looking at the circle differently, then you're probably right as well. All right, so just remember, we did all the central angles. The central angle matches the arc measure on the outside of it. So we're going to go ahead and see what we can answer. So the arc measure of CD, that means we're measuring from C to D. It's a minor arc because there's only two letters there. So this little arc right here, we know that if the central angle is 90, the arc measure is also 90 degrees. We're not talking about 90 inches or 90 centimeters. We're talking about the measure of this arc is 90 degrees. All right, so now we need F to D. So we're talking about minor arc from F to D. So we're talking about this space right here. I feel like I need some more colors. All right, so from starting at F all the way around to D, it's still a minor arc because it's only a small piece of the circle. That's less than 180. So we know this part's 34. We know this part's 90. And if we put that together, we'll get FD. So 90 plus 34 gives you 124 degrees. All right, so now we're looking at some major arcs. That means these arcs are going to be bigger because there's three letters there. All right, so we're going from D to C to F. All right, so D to C to F. Hold on, let me find some colors, sorry. All right, so my bad, D to C to F. So we're gonna go all the way around, starting at D, D to C, all the way around to F. So this blue part right here. All right, so we know that this part's 90. We know this part's 90. We know this part's 56. So you're gonna add all of that up. We know 90 and 90 is 180 plus 56 is 236. And you can check this a few different ways. You know that it has to be a major arc, so your answer should be greater than 180, which it is. Also, you want to make sure that you follow the order here. You want to start at D, go through C, and end at F. All right, last but not least, G to D to F, and it's a major arc, so it should be a bigger part of the circle because there's three letters. So you're going to start at G, you're going to go through D, and all the way to F. Okay, so there's a few ways that you can look at this. So if you go this way, G to D back around to F, that's greater than 180, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Or my bad, it's greater than 360. You can't go around the circle and then keep going. So you're gonna have to go, you gotta kind of have to look at how you're gonna go. We're not gonna go right because that we hit F first. We wanna go left. So we're gonna start at G, we're gonna go around to D, and all the way around to F. This should be very big because it's almost the entire circle. So you can do this a bunch of different ways. We have all of the arc measures that it is. So it'd be 90 plus 90 plus 90 plus 34. Or you can think about it, it's the whole circle minus that 56 part. So that's how I would do it. So 360 minus 56 gives you 304 degrees. Okay, you can also add all your parts together. So 90 and 90 and 90 makes 270 plus 34. Once again, you get 304 degrees. All right, so we did number one. All right, we're gonna go ahead and do number 3. All right, so we know this is 87. This central angle is 87, so we know that this arc measure is 87 from T to U. We know that this arc measure is 72, which means we know this in central angle is 72. Let's see what else we know. We know this is a perfectly straight line, so you know that all 3 of these angles add up to 180. So if you take 180 minus the 72 and minus the 87, you're left with 21, which would be what this little bitty central angle is here. And if you know the central angle is 21, you know this arc measure is 21 degrees. Okay, then before in number 1, I did vertical angles, so you know that these are 2 perfectly straight lines. That means this would be 72 and this would be 72. But this time I'm going to do something a little bit different. So this time I'm going to look at these as lines, perfectly straight lines. So anytime you have a perfectly straight line, you know it adds up to 180. So we know this angle, we know this angle, so we can use that to find this missing angle right here because these 3 angles together also make a perfectly straight line. So I'm going to start with 180. I'm going to take away 87, and then I'm going to take away 21, and I'm left with 72. So you know this is equal to 72. So you could do either. You know that these are vertical angles because they're perfectly, it's an X, and they're perfectly across from each other, or, let me see, these 3 angles together add up to 180. Okay, so I'm going to stay with that idea, and I know that these 2 angles together add up to 180 because they make a perfectly straight line. So now I'm going to solve for this angle right here. So 180 minus 72 would be 108 degrees, which it's a much larger angle, so that makes sense. If you notice, I did some arcs here. You know, congruency means the same number of arcs, so that I'm not saying they're congruent. I'm just trying to show you the part that we're talking about. Okay, so you know that if this central angle is 72 degrees, you know that this arc measure is also 72 degrees. If this central angle is 108 degrees, you know from W to V, arc measure is 108 degrees. All right, so now let's go and actually figure out what we're looking for here, or the answers. So it says the measure of angle U to X to V. So starting at U and going to X, which is the center, U to X to V. So we're talking about this angle right here, the central angle, and the way you know it's an angle, not an arc, is because of the angle measure is 72 degrees. And we know that because we connected U to X to V, and that angle right here is 72 degrees. Okay, so now we need minor arc, ST, the measure of minor arc, because it's only 2 letters, S to T. So S to T is this little bitty arc right here. We already have it labeled. It's 21 degrees. All right, the next one we need is the measure of minor arc. It's only 2 letters, W to V. So this little part, W to V, we already know is 108 degrees because we did all that work to begin with. We need minor arc, T to W. So let's see where T is. Okay, so this is important. Some of you may look at this angle from T to W, but the only thing here that you have to be careful about is this angle is much greater than 180 degrees. And this is telling you it's a minor arc. From T to W, it's only 2 letters. So we want a arc less than 180. So you're going to have to go left from T to W. So that would be this part right here, from T to W. And it's because it's 2 letters. So T to W is going to be those 2 little parts together. 21 plus 72 gives you 93 degrees. And it looks very close to a right angle, so you know you're right. All right, now this is the different part. Here was the minor arc, T to W. Here is the major arc from T through V to W. Sorry. All right, so T to V to W. It's going to be a big arc because there's 3 letters there. So starting at T, going through V all the way around to W. So it's going to be this whole part of the circle. This very large part. All right, so once again, you can do this 2 different ways. We already have everything labeled up here. So you can just add all this up. 87 plus 72 plus 108. And you get 267, which makes sense because it should be a number greater than 180. It's a large portion of the circle. So 267 degrees. Okay. You could also see that it's every part of the circle. So it's 360 degrees minus this part right here. So 360 minus 21 minus 72. Once again, you get 267 degrees. So whichever way you'd like to look at it. All right, so number 5, same concepts, except they're throwing a little bit of algebra in there for you. All right, so the first thing that we have to do is solve for x. So if we know that this angle is this, my bad, I lied. This arc measure is equal to 10x minus 22. We know this central angle is equal to 10x minus 22. If we know that this arc measure is 8x plus 12, we know this central angle is 8x plus 12. And what's really nice is that these two lines create a perfect x, which means these two angles are vertical angles, which we know they're congruent, which means their measures are equal. So what you're going to do is you're going to take these two expressions and set them equal to each other. So you have 10x minus 22 is equal to 8x plus 12. Now you guys could solve this a million different ways. I'm going to solve it my way. You should get the same answer as long as you're doing opposites. Do not, just because you see minus 22 here, don't subtract 22 here. Remember, you have to do the opposite to get rid of everything. All right, so I'm going to get rid of my smaller variable first. So I'm going to subtract 8x from both sides. Those cancel. 10x minus 8x is 2x minus 22 equals a positive 12. I want to get the 2x by itself. I want to get rid of minus 22. The way you get rid of minus 22 is plus 22 on both sides. Those cancel. I'm going to bring it over. So we have 2x is equal to 12 and 22 is 34. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X is equal to, I believe it's 17. Let's see if I'm right. 34 divided by 2. I don't have you guys giving me all my answers all the time now. All right, so we have x is equal to 17. And we know that, not because they look the same, but because we know these angles are congruent because their arc measures are congruent to their central angle measures. And we know these two angles are vertical angles because an x is created and they're opposite of each other. So we're allowed to set their expressions equal or their values equal to each other. And that's how we're able to solve for x. Okay, so now we need to get values for these. I'm kind of skipping over what we're looking for right now. We need to actually get these values before we solve for any measures. So what you're going to do is you're going to take 17 and you're going to plug it in. So 10 times 17 minus 22 will give you B to C. So let's see what we get. 10 times 17 equals minus 22 is 148 degrees. Now, if you trust your math, then you can go ahead and put that this one's also equal to 148 because you know they're equivalent, but I don't trust myself enough, so I'm going to plug it in. So 8 times 17 plus 12. Let's see what we get. Should be the same. 8 times 17 plus 12, 148. All right, we did our math correctly. All right, so you know that this is 148 degrees, this angle here. You know this angle here is also 148 degrees. Now, you could do this multiple different ways. You guys are very smart. I am going to look at this as 180 degrees, two angles that create a perfectly straight line. So if I know this is 180, I'm going to subtract 148, and I get 32 degrees. It's a very small angle. It's a cute angle, so, you know, it makes sense. Then instead of doing it again, I know that these are across from each other. They're vertical angles, so I know that this is a 32 degree angle as well. And if you would like to make sure you're correct, you can add all four of these angles up. They should add up to 180 degrees. No, that's a lie. They should add up to 360 degrees, which they do. Okay, so now let's look at what the question's actually asking. We need the measure of arc A to D. So we need from A to D. It's a minor arc, so we need this arc right here. And we know that it's 148 degrees because we plugged in for x. So it's 148 degrees. C to D, we need this little part right here from C to D. It's a minor arc. It's going to be the little part, which is less than 180. So it's going to be 32 degrees. And now this is the one where we have our major arc from B to D to C. So you don't want to go this way because you go B, C, D. Okay, so we want to go around the opposite way, and we want to make sure that it's greater than 180. So you want to start at B, you want to go through D into C, and you can't go around more than once. So you're going to go all the way around this section, and because it's greater than half the circle, we know that this is the correct arc. So it's going to be 32, 148, and 32 all together. So 32 plus 148 plus 32 gives you 212 degrees. We know that's greater than 180. Another thing you could do, if you wanted to, another way you could look at this was, the whole circle is 360. B to D to C, this arc is just leaving off this part. So you could subtract 148, and you're also left with 212. So you know your answer is right. Okay, so if you haven't done 2, 4, and 6, go ahead and do 2, 4, and 6 now on your own. You should have enough information to be able to solve for those. So go ahead and do that. Pause the video. If you have already done, if you went ahead and did 1 through 6 already, that's fine. Check your answers for 1 through 5 right now, and at the very end of the video, I will give you answers for 2, 4, and 6. Okay, let's go to the back. This is the most important part. Central arc measures and central angle measures and arc measures are important, but arc length is even more important than that. So you're talking about the distance around the circle, how many feet, how many centimeters. If you're talking about the crust of a pizza, how much crust do you actually have? It doesn't matter when you're talking about real world situations, the amount of degrees isn't that big of a deal. It's how much crust on your pizza. Did you get 5 inches of crust, or did you get an inch of crust? If you're talking about walking, like maybe around a park, if the park is in a circle, or if you're walking a lap, maybe how many feet do I have to walk around? I don't want to know that I walked 90 degrees. I want to know how many feet I had to actually walk. So that's what we're starting here. Okay, so now let's think about this. Before we even get up here, let's just look at this circle. If I'm trying to find the length of the outside, the length of the outside has to do with the angle measure. For instance, if I'm trying to find the length of BC, it has to do with 68 degrees, because if this angle measure was shorter, so say I make it smaller, then this arc length is smaller because the angle is talking about a smaller arc. If I extended this line around and it was greater than 180, greater than 68, then I'm talking about my arc length is going to be much greater. So the smaller your angle, the smaller your arc. The greater your angle, the greater your arc. For instance, we know this angle is bigger, so it makes a bigger arc. This angle here is smaller, so it makes a smaller arc. Same thing with this. This angle measure is really big, 162. This arc measure is very large. This teeny tiny angle is very small, so this little tiny arc length is going to be very small. Okay, so let's see how we do this. So it says the arc length is part of the circumference. So this is the part of it. The circumference would be the whole thing. The arc length depends on the central angle, like we were just saying. If the central angle is small, the arc length is going to be small. If the central angle is large, the arc length is going to be large. So it says, the larger the central angle, the longer the arc. The smaller the central angle, the shorter the arc. All right, so the arc measure is proportional to the arc length. So you create a proportion. The arc length is part out of the circumference is the whole. The arc measure is the central angle. That's part of the whole circle, 360 degrees. So you're really just creating a proportion. Part over whole equals part over whole. So you probably may have done some of this in 6th grade. We've done proportions this year, but particularly part out of whole. All right, so you're talking about the length of the arc is a part of the entire circumference. And the way you're going to get that is using your central arc measure, or central angle measure, or your arc measure, and that's going to be out of 360. The reason we get 360 here is because that's the whole circle. So you are going to use this proportion every single time. Okay, so it says if EB, so E to B, so we're talking about the radius, is 15 centimeters. Find the length of arc C to D. So we need from C to D. So this is what we're solving for. Okay, so arc length is going to be, we'll call this X. So X over the circumference, okay? What we have to remember for circumference is the formula. So circumference is equal to the diameter times pi, or the circumference is equal to 2 times the radius times pi. Okay, because 2 of the radius is equal to the diameter. All right, so your directions say determine the arc length, round your answer to the nearest hundredth, and use 3.14 for pi. All right, so to get the circumference, we need 2, because they gave us the radius. So 2 times the radius times 3.14. That's just circumference, okay? So 2 times the radius times 3.14, that's our radius, equals the arc measure. So what we need is this angle right here to find the arc measure. So we know that this creates a perfectly straight line. So we're going to do 180 minus 68 is 112 degrees. So it's 112 degrees out of 360 degrees. So our arc length, which is X, depends on this 112 degrees, because this arc length is going to be bigger than this one because this angle is greater. All right, and then the way that you solve proportions is you multiply across, slanted. So 360 times X equals all of this multiplied together. Now, if you would like to get this number first and then multiply it times that, it's perfectly fine, but multiplication order doesn't matter. All right, so let's see what's my best lighting. All right, so 2 times 15 times 3.14 times 112, and use the whole number. Don't start rounding right now. So you only round at the very end. So let's see, 10,550.4. Okay, then to solve for X, you divide by 3. It's a one-step equation. You divide by 360 on both sides. X is equal to, divide by 360. And you're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So you have 29.306. You cannot just cut off that 6, okay? If 30 is the hundredths place, if we're rounding to 30, we look behind it. That 6 is going to make this go up. So X is about 29.31. And that is your final answer. So this is about 29.31, and we're talking about centimeters here because our radius is centimeters. Now let's think about this. If this is 15, then this is 29.31. We know it's going to be larger, so that number makes sense. Okay, let's go ahead and try number 9. All right, so it says if V to S, so we're talking about the diameter. So this is the diameter because it goes all the way across, is 12. Find the length of UT. So we need this arc right here. Find the length of arc U to T. So we need this arc length right here. So we're going to use our proportion again. So the arc length over the circumference. This time you're given your diameter, so I'm going to do 12 times 3.14. If you did the radius would be 6 times 2 is 12 times 3.14. So this is your circumference. Equals, we need this number of degrees out of 360. All right, so let's see here. We know this is 90. We know that this creates a perfectly straight line. these two angles right here. So it'd be 180 minus 127 will give you this angle right here. So 180 minus 127 is 53. So you know this angle is 53. Now you have a perfectly straight line with these three angles. So you're going to do 180 minus one of them, 90, minus the other one, 53, and you're left with this little angle in the middle, 37. And you know it's a really small angle, so 37 makes sense. So it's 37 degrees out of 360 degrees. So let's think about your answer for right now. If this length is 12 meters, this length right here should be smaller than 12. Because if you think about it, if you were to take this and wrap it around, it would go way past this little piece right here. So just as you're doing your math, just make sure you kind of think about what you're doing. All right, so we're going to cross multiply. So it'd be 360 times x equals 12 times 3.14 times 37 equals 1,394.16. Remember, don't round anything yet. To get x by itself, we need to divide by 360 on both sides. So divided by 360 is 3.872. Remember, if you round into the nearest hundredths place, you look at what's in your hundredths place. Right now we have 87. You look behind it to figure out how you're going to round. The 2 is not big enough to round this up, so it's going to stay at 3.87. Now let's think about it. Before we said this was 12 all the way across. So this was going to be much smaller. Your answer is 3.87 meters. It makes sense because it's a very small number. Okay, so if I were you, I think we've done enough from here. As long as you can remember this, proportion, the length of the arc, we're talking about the length of the arc out of the whole thing is equal to the arc measure out of the whole thing, which is 360. So the part of the arc out of the whole thing, which is circumference, equals the part of the angle out of the whole angle, which is 360 degrees. So the part out of the whole is equal to the part out of the whole. All right, so if I were you, I would try number 11 on your own right now. You can pause this video and then check back with your answers in just a second. Okay, so number 11, it tells you that FG, so this is the radius, is 27 yards. Find the length from F to E to D. So you know that this is a major arc because you're using 3 letters. So from F all the way to E, all the way to D. This is going to be a large portion of the circle. All right, so you're going to do the same thing. So we need the arc length, so we're going to call this X, out of the whole circumference. To find circumference, if we're going to use the radius, it's 2 times the radius times 3.14 equals the part of the circle out of 360 degrees. So we need this central angle or this arc measure right now. So we know this is 90. So I see the way that I would go with this would be these 3 angles are given and I'm missing this one. So I would we're talking about the whole circle minus these 3. So 360 minus 90 minus 47 minus 80 is 143 degrees. We know that this is a very large angle, so 147 makes sense. Okay, so our piece of our arc, or piece of our circle, is 90 plus 147, which would be 237 degrees. We're talking about this arc. It makes sense because it's greater than 180. And if you wanted to double check it, this has to be 237, and these two together have to be, all of it has to add up to 360. So 360 minus 47 minus 80 gives you, hold on a second. 360 minus 47 minus 80 is 233. What did I do wrong? All right, 360 minus 47 minus 80 minus 90 is 143. 143. You guys are probably screaming at me right now. See, look, it's just like class. I mess up. I just can't hear you correcting me. All right, so now 90 plus 143 is 233. See, this is why you always do it two ways. All right, so we have the part of our arc length out of the whole arc length which would be the circumference, equals the part of the degree of the circle out of the whole degree of the circle, which is 360. All right, so now we are going to cross multiply. 360 times x equals, most of you can probably do this in like 30 seconds in your calculator, which is fine. 2 times 27 times 3.14 times 233. You're going to get a pretty large number. 39,507.48. Divide both sides by 360. It's a one-step equation. So you get 109.743. We want to round this to the nearest hundredth. So right now we have 74. You're going to look behind it. It's a 3. 3 is not big enough for you to round up. So x is about 109.74 yards. Now let's think about this. If this little piece right here, if your radius, let's see, this little piece right here, if your radius is 27, think about, does that make sense that this number would be 109? I think it does, because it looks to me like if I were to lay all these out, 1, 2, 3, 4, it would take about 4 of those, which that number makes sense. So just kind of think about your numbers, make sure they make sense. Okay, so like I said in the beginning, we're not going to use a forms for this just because there is a lot of different answers on the front here, and I don't want you guys to have to put in 47 numbers. So what you're going to do is you're going to finish this, okay? Do not just copy down my answers, because you're not going to learn anything. So go ahead and pause this, and then in a second, I'm going to list all of the answers, and you can come back and check your work. All right, so here are your answers for 2, 4, and 6. So if I were you, just pause this and go through and check them. All right, and then on the back, these are your 3 answers for 8, 10, and 12. If you have any questions about how I did these, because I didn't really work these out, you can always email me, message me on Remind. I can do those for you. Also, if your answers are slightly off, remember that we're using 3.14 for pi. If you're using the pi button on your calculator, you're going to get a greater number, because pi is actually bigger than 3.14 and your calculator uses a larger number. So, and then just look at your rounding. Some of you round incorrectly. All right, if you have any questions, email me. I hope this was a lot of information, especially on the back, just because of the formula that you're using. You kind of have to use a formula inside of a proportion, which is kind of a lot, but we're going to have a lot of practice on this, so hopefully you'll get the hang of it. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys are all doing good. Miss you. Have a good day. Bye.